My talk tonight is going to be about GraphQL and Apollo. So, how many of you have used GraphQL before? Okay, not a lot. How many of you are using it in production? A couple, all right. So I think you all should learn a lot tonight, and for those of you who have used it before, if there's anything that I'm missing, feel free to help me answer questions. So with that being said, let's see if that works. There we go. So this is a Chimera, and this is from D&D, which I play and love. So I've had a lot of struggles with using REST APIs, the reason being that for the first year of my career, I had the pleasure of working with GraphQL and Apollo, and after that, it's like you start out with the $1,000 bottle of wine, and then you start drinking, crappy $5 wine from the gas station, and you're wondering, like, why is anybody drinking this? And that's how I feel about REST. So, so that's where this image came from. That's my inner feelings. I don't know if anyone else has ever been frustrated by working with a ton of different endpoints required to obtain data for just a single view. Has anyone else spent hours of back and forth with the team developing the API, trying to figure out what the API is actually supposed to do? Have you ever discovered that the API would need to be completely rewritten to support your view? And have you ever dealt with a lot of performance concerns coming from the multiple round trips to the server? Because I have, just in the last 2 weeks, suffered from all of these things. No offense to my company, they're great. But it's a struggle that a lot of people who have dealt with REST APIs have had to deal with. And what if I told you that with GraphQL, you don't have to deal with these things? At least not to the same extent. There's going to be problems with everything, but with GraphQL, these concerns aren't really as big of an issue. And hang in with me for a moment, because I have my notes up on my phone so that I can read the slides to you all. All right, so what's GraphQL? A lot of you haven't used it before, so what is it? I'm going to start out by giving a brief history of GraphQL. It was developed by Facebook in 2012 when they encountered a lot of complexities trying to develop a native iOS mobile app. So I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, their app was just basically a wrapper around the actual website, which was a PHP monolith, I believe. So they had a lot of performance issues on mobile, and that really necessitated creating a more efficient means of querying the API. Internally, it was originally called Supergraph, which I'm not sure if even those of you who have used GraphQL might have known, because I didn't until I started researching this talk. Fortunately, one of the co-creators thought that name was stupid, and before releasing it to the public in 2015, they renamed it to GraphQL. Great, so you know the history of GraphQL in a nutshell. What is it? It's not a database technology. It's not. So you can use any database or even an API to work with GraphQL. You can write a GraphQL API on top of a SOAP API. You can do a lot with it. Mongo, Postgres, anything is really compatible with GraphQL because it's not opinionated about your database. It's also not a language in itself, and it is language agnostic. So on the front end, with web development, you're really going to be dealing with JavaScript and TypeScript for the most part. And then on the back end, on mobile, you have a solution for pretty much every language. And those include Scala, Java, Node. If you're on mobile, Swift, really anything you want, you can use GraphQL. And the only reason I cut it off here was because that was the end of the line on the slide. So, let me take a drink of water. So what GraphQL is a query language for your API, which enables declarative data fetching from the client. And declarative data fetching means that the client can request and receive only the data it wants. If anyone is familiar with using a database technology like SQL, that's not too dissimilar from writing a select statement where you're only selecting the ID and username of a person because that's all you want back. So instead of thinking about APIs and endpoints, you think of an API really as a graph of interconnected data. And it works a lot like a relational database in that way, but again, it is not a database technology in itself. Okay, so I'm drinking a lot of water because I'm pretty dehydrated with all this dry winter air. Cool. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of how to use GraphQL. Starting off with some terminology. These are really the biggest things you're going to run into when you're researching GraphQL. Queries are the way that you fetch data. So on a REST endpoint, you would do a GET request, and that would be a query. Mutations are how you modify data. So that's all-encompassing of the equivalent of REST post, put, patch, and delete. And then continuous connection with the server is accomplished with subscriptions. So here's a sample query and a sample response. So on the left-hand side, you have the request. You're asking for a user, and all you want is their username and whether or not they're active in the system. And on the right-hand side, you can see that's all you get back. You're not getting back a giant response giving you that user's grandparents, that user's pets' names, the user's friends on Facebook. You're just getting back their username and whether or not they're active because that's all you wanted to display in the client. Thank you. So, yeah, all the client needed was these two pieces of data, and that's all it got back. So another thing is that GraphQL really, really strongly recommends using JSON to format responses, so it's pretty easily parsed by the client. So here's a more complex query, and this comes straight from the Facebook engineering site. So you're going to see examples that include one of the GraphQL co-founders' names, which is Lee Byron, and a pretty specific example that relates to Facebook. So they're asking for a user, and they're asking for the user's name, their ID, their profile picture, information about the profile picture, the friends of that user, and the friends' friends, and their names. So they're asking for quite a bit. In REST, that would be, what, 4 API calls? Just kind of eyeballing it there. But with GraphQL, it's a single request to the server, so there's only one round trip occurring. So you're getting back all of this data in the same shape that you asked for it in. So in REST, you deal a lot with query parameters. In GraphQL, everything's going to be the same shape, and it's wonderful. All right, well, I've already told you a little bit about why you use it, but let's go into a little bit more detail. So, just a few reasons. It does have a growing community. I'll show you some data about that in a few minutes, but it's been growing a lot since it was released 4 years ago, 4.5, however many. You have a single endpoint. You aren't dealing with a multitude of endpoints with GraphQL. Typically, that endpoint is going to look something like, let's say, airbnb.com/API/GraphQL. And the API is considered one unified entity as opposed to a bunch of different entities that kind of go together but maybe don't. It's also version free. So new fields are easily added to the API without impacting whether or not that API still functions. And as for removing fields, the backend developers can actually set deprecation on certain fields and why they're being deprecated. So the client will know when they attempt to query these fields that, hey, we're still letting you query this data, but guess what? Eventually we're going to take it out, so you need to stop using this. Another thing is that it's strongly typed. So that allows for a lot of cool things when it comes to your introspection on the client side. Your client is always aware of the current contract with the API. Introspection just means that there's really always access to the full GraphQL schema and its type system and documentation. Less data returned in requests means your UI is faster, especially when you're dealing with more complex queries. And then adoption of GraphQL can be incremental. You don't have to convert your entire API to use GraphQL. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a bit as well. All right, so my personal experience, when it came to working with the devs who were working on the API, there were minimal frustrations when it was the GraphQL API that we were working with. Requirement updates were pretty simple to implement, and they were immediately accessible to me in the client, and I could immediately know how to test them because of GraphQL tooling. The documentation is always current and complete. It is impossible for GraphQL documentation to be out of sync with the schema. The API spec matching the shape of your query means your testing is easier. And then Graphical and GraphQL Playground are the two tools, GraphQL Playground being written on top of Graphical, that you would use for introspection of your GraphQL schema, and to me, they are equivalent to sparkling unicorns because they're that amazing. And I'll demo one or both of those later. So here's some data. Water time. Here's some data from the most recent State of JS survey. That survey has been released every year since 2016, and this past year, 20,000 responses were received, one of them being my own. So over on the far left, that's the 2016 data of how many people have used GraphQL before, how many people have heard of GraphQL before. The dark red represents people who have used GraphQL before and would use it again. The light pink, which you can't really see, are the people who have used GraphQL before and would absolutely not use it again. You can't see that line. The darker blue are the people who have heard of GraphQL and want to learn it. And the light blue is, I've heard of GraphQL and I'm not interested. Finally, there's that little gray bar area at the top of people who have never heard of GraphQL. So you can see pretty consistently an increase over the years in adoption and name recognition of GraphQL. Back in 2016, this was the year after it was open sourced, so the year after people actually were able to use it outside of Facebook. Only about 5% of people had used GraphQL, but 44% of people wanted to learn it. So that's already about half of people who have either used it or really want to use it. And now you go into 2019, which this survey was given at the end of 2019, so this is pretty recent data. You'll see that almost 40% of people at this point have used GraphQL before and would use it again. 50.6% of people want to learn it. So that's almost 90%, maybe more than 90%. Yeah, 88, 89% of people who either have used GraphQL or want to. So those statistics are pretty interesting to me, just showing that yes, GraphQL is increasing in adoption. I've done a little bit of myth busting already, but let's do some more. The first myth is the one that I already talked about. GraphQL is not all or nothing. You can incrementally adopt GraphQL on your server. You can have a single endpoint for GraphQL with a single object on it and use that. You don't have to have your entire schema in GraphQL all at once. The next myth is actually one that I've heard as a criticism of a couple of backend developers I've met separately. So the thing that they thought was that GraphQL allows the client to control the database queries, which is not true. The server can actually implement controls to prevent abuse by the client. And because I've not really worked much with server-side GraphQL, I've not used this before myself, but some of the server-side controls include setting timeouts, throttling requests, setting a maximum query depth. So if you remember how that Facebook example looked, you had the user, you had their profile picture, and then inside of profile picture you had more data. So it can set how deep you can go there. You can also set the query complexity. All of this you can find more information about online. I learned all this from the How to GraphQL Introduction to GraphQL in their advanced section. So yeah, there are absolutely controls that can be implemented to prevent the client from using it. And by the way, let me reiterate, GraphQL is not a database language, so the client isn't querying your database. Finally, another myth is that only front-end developers benefit from GraphQL. And since I'm not a back-end developer, I'm kind of speaking for them. but a lot of the things that I was reading as part of my preparation for tonight were coming from backend developers who enjoyed that their API no longer had to be concerned about versioning. They don't have to worry about sending error response codes. So you don't have this big question of, is it a 401, is it a 403, what is it? It's just an error. And then the API also doesn't have to be overly coupled with UI requirements. I've worked with endpoints that are entirely coupled to a specific view of the UI, and that's not really something that should happen in GraphQL, because GraphQL, you're thinking about it in different terms. Okay, so more statistics. These ones are for the GraphQL client libraries. And this is specifically React client libraries. So there's really three that get talked about at this point. The top bright green line is React Apollo on the npm trends comparison site, where you can see how many downloads a particular library has had over the course of the last 6 months or the last year. In this case, I chose a year. So over the last year, React Apollo has stayed pretty high in terms of downloads on npm. The orange line, or red, whatever that color is, below that, that's React Relay. React Relay is Facebook's response to creating a library on the front end to work with GraphQL. And then finally, there at the bottom is something that's a little bit newer to the scene. I think it's about a year old. It's a library called Urkel. You will find a tutorial on how to GraphQL and how to use this, but as you can see, the downloads haven't really been that high. So kind of going with that, more data from the 2019 State of JS survey. Out of the 20,000 people who responded, 5,500 of them say they've used Apollo. So that's 22% or so, 23. That's a lot. And way below that is Relay. 825 people say they've used Relay, and that's less than 5%. And finally, you have Urkel. 19 people mentioned it. It was a write-in, so it doesn't have a huge community of support. But it's out there. It's supposed to be a lighter implementation. I haven't used it. One thing I do want to clarify is that you don't have to use any of these to work with GraphQL. You can roll your own solution, but you're going to lose a lot of things from doing so. So let me introduce Apollo Client. As it pertains to React specifically, but it does exist for other UI frameworks, and the knowledge that you gain here would also translate into, say, Vue Apollo. So when I worked at that first job that I told you about, coming right out of teaching myself to code, I was using an older implementation of Apollo Client, so everything that you're about to see is pretty much me relearning Apollo Client's newer APIs. But before I show you that, let's talk about some features of Apollo. It does state management and caching for you. You don't need to use Redux for your API if you're using Apollo. In fact, because you're using Apollo, you might not need Redux at all for a larger, more complex application, which is huge in itself. This is something that I didn't realize when I first started using Apollo, and I was really trying hard to get the Apollo data into our Redux store, and it just wasn't working. And I discovered it doesn't need to be. Your components, once your query is run, will have access as soon as you connect to Apollo. It has a large community of support, so questions that you have may have already been answered, and if they haven't, posting to Stack Overflow is more likely to get you a response. It also has browser developer tools, which is basically the graphical interface. It can do a little bit more. It has 3 stars on the Chrome download store, so I don't really know how good it is. I tried it out before this talk and it seemed okay for a test app. I don't really know how it would work in production, but that's not really the biggest benefit of Apollo anyway. And then the next 2 things also I don't really have much experience with, but there apparently is tooling to auto-generate TypeScript types that Apollo offers. It's a code gen that you can run because GraphQL is already going to be strongly typed by requirement of the spec. Apollo has written some sort of script to convert all that into TypeScript, or you can do it yourself. And then this is new to me. I did not know this, but you can use Apollo with REST endpoints. And that way, you can have like a combination of GraphQL and REST while you're converting from one API technology to another. You can also use it if you don't really have control over the API, but you want to use it in Apollo, or if you just want to test it out. Okay, this is the part that could go wrong. I followed the tutorial for how to GraphQL Apollo to learn their newer APIs and to see kind of what I never did learn when I was using it. That GitHub repository is one that everyone should be able to access if they want to. Just know that if you download this and you run it, currently my Prisma dev server is attached to this. So if you run the code and you make any data modifications, they're going to show up in my database, which is probably something I'll fix later. I'll just delete the database. But I didn't want to before this one. So I would recommend following the tutorial yourself so you can get all this set up. They provide the backend server for you if you don't want to follow the no tutorial. And you can kind of decide what you like about the tutorial and what you do better. And for me, I did think there were a few things that could be done better, so I did them. And that's where it says there's minor modifications in my version. So if you look at my code, it's not going to exactly reflect what you see on the final version of that tutorial. And this is where I'm going to try to run code. So let's see how this goes. One moment. Oh my goodness. Okay. Oh, look, there's code. All right. So, I'm really paranoid. I already got all the servers started on this, so hopefully it works. I didn't really want to run the start commands, but instructions for doing so are in my GitHub repo on the README. I absolutely can. Thank you. It's hard to see what the mouse is there. Cool. That is not the file I want to start on. That is. Okay. So if you compare this to the tutorial line, you'll see I've made some changes. For example, to run the front end portion, you have to use npm. I've never used Yarn in my life, but the tutorial thinks that I want to and that I should. I didn't want to. So it's using npm. The backend does have to be started by using Yarn, so I had to install Yarn just for you guys. Cool. So let's see. Actually, before I get to the code, let me just show you the app that you make as the part of the tutorial. If I can find it, I found it. Here we go. Now everything is going to be over here. Okay. I don't know how many of you all are familiar with Hacker News. Hacker News' actual website looks like this. It's just a bunch of links. You can vote on links, you can sort the links, you can submit new links and stuff. So the tutorial mostly has you copying them. I don't like their UI, so I made a few changes. Mostly to the font and to colors and things. Nothing huge. I didn't spend a lot of time reworking this. But yeah, this is the outcome of what they have you build as part of the tutorial. There is a login functionality. It's really just to show you authentication. So it's not really a real world scenario here, but it does show you how to link up off with Apollo. So I'm just gonna use my super secure username and password here. I wonder what that password could be. Let's log in. There we go. Now you see the same view I showed you a second ago. Login is required to vote on links, which I didn't really show you, but that was implemented to show you how auth works. And there's pagination going on here. You can see with the cache, once your queries are run, it's really, really fast. You can also filter your links, and I'll just do that real quick. So because those queries have already run, the data for them was already in cache, and that's why it loaded so quickly. And you can submit new links, which what's your question?
Is that cache per user or is it for all users? So like once you hit it, is it cache for everyone?
The cache is for the app, not really user specific. Yeah, so it's not really coupled to the user so much as your app and your GraphQL schema implementation. So yeah, you're gonna find that your queries get cached, but there's really nothing that ties that to a specific user, I don't think. Yeah, so I am going to link you because I thought I would have. It's weird. What should I link you guys to? Meetup, that's a great example. I'm going to need another one later. Oh, not very good. And you can see that as soon as that mutation ran, which was the modification query, it has logic implemented to automatically show that update in the UI. So that's the app. Real quick, I also want to show you GraphQL Playground, which I have open right here. Oh no, I already have a query in there. Let me refresh it. Y'all are getting spoilers. Okay. Can't really see that, can you? Can you? Yeah, it's pretty dark. I like the dark mode. GraphQL Playground is pretty cool because you can set themes and stuff, so this one's dark. Can you see it at all? Okay. Yeah, it's just hard to see over here. I'm going to drag it back for a second. Let's see if this works. There we go. Pick some bright white. Okay. There. So on the left is a query. It's kind of complex, so I'm going to delete some stuff from it so you can see more easily just as simple as it is. I might be deleting brackets that I need though, so let's see. Yeah, I did. Okay. Goodness gracious me. Okay, so here I just want to query my feed of links. I want to get back their IDs, when they were created, and how many of them there are in total. Before I run this, I just want to say, this is magic. It's great, because this is all I'm going to get back. See? That's all I got back. See, I only have the ID and it created at, and then I have the ID and it created at, and then down here I have the total count of links. And I knew I could query that based on, first of all, there's autocomplete. So if I start typing, you'll see this is out of the box, by the way. This is not something that you need to really set up. This tooling is available to you if you use GraphQL. So you know there's votes, and you know there's an ID for the vote, etc., etc. And you can also find that out by looking at the docs. These are the auto-generated documentation that I told you about. So this was the feed query that I just ran. And that exclamation point means that it's required to turn you back a data type of feed. Up here at the top, you can see the parameters that you can request to customize the data you get back. So in this case, you can submit a filter. You can submit whether or not to skip any data. You can submit order by. And then for order by, you can actually find out what you're allowed to order it by because of enums. Hold on, this big reveal is delayed because it's not clicking. All right, come on. All right, it's being mean. All right, maybe I can't click on it there. There we go. There's the enum. So the enum shows you all of the things that you're allowed to filter by, and that's just automatically available to you because the API is set up that way. You don't have to rely on a Swagger doc having complete information. It's just there. Yeah, so you can pretty much see any parameters that your feed will return. You can see what data types they are. Custom things will be pretty obvious. Strings, ints are not custom, whereas link would be. So you can click on that to see what a link looks like. Yeah, so this is GraphQL Playground. The tool GraphQL looks a lot like this, but has fewer features. So it's basically like a rich man's Postman. All right. So let me get back to the presentation. I think I actually skipped ahead a little bit. Yeah, let me present for 2 seconds. Yeah, there's GraphQL Playground and a screenshot and a link to the additional features that GraphQL Playground has on top of GraphQL. So eventually I will delete all my speaker notes from the slides so you all can download these and see the information. Okay. So the Apollo configuration. Let me see. I'm just going to read you guys, and then I'm going to show you the code. So in your index.js file, you set up the GraphQL endpoint that you want to point to. Again, usually that's whatever your host is, /API/GraphQL. You can set headers there, just like you would with Axios, that would be applied to every single call. So you could apply your auth information there. You could apply any custom headers you have going on just through this middleware. You can set up your WebSocket subscriptions and your cache, and it's all in one file. I do want to point out, after water, that the Apollo documentation recommends that you use something they call Apollo Boost. And Apollo Boost is the Create React app or the Redux toolkit of Apollo client. It is not fully featured, and to follow this tutorial, you can't use Apollo Boost because subscriptions are not supported in Apollo Boost. So the config that I'm about to show you is totally configured through piecing together the different Apollo middlewares, whereas Apollo Boost will just kind of come with what it thinks you need. I'm trying to get out of this. Oh. Yay, code. So much like you might be setting up a Redux store, this is where you set up your Apollo store and your Apollo provider. So this create HTTP link and setting context, that's how you create your GraphQL endpoint, how you set up your custom headers for that endpoint, and then you can also set up multiple endpoints here if you have REST involved. So if you're working with a lot of REST endpoints, you can connect them all through this configuration. There's just going to be some custom logic you have to do to determine which endpoint to use. So this is where you're setting up your WebSocket link. So the backend API allows a couple of subscriptions, and they're set up using this WebSocket link on localhost. Then here at the very end, when you're rendering to the DOM in your React DOM.render, just like you would with Redux, you just wrap your app with the Apollo provider, and you pass it to the client, much like you would pass the store if you were using Redux. Okay, so if you remember that view, which I'll show again in a second, just one query was able to obtain that list of links, the vote count for each link, and if the tutorial were more complete, I'll show you this in a second, it would actually show you the user who submitted the link, but the tutorial isn't complete, and it just shows unknown user, and it's not my fault, because I didn't feel like debugging your stuff. Normally, that would be at least 3 API calls. You make one to get the list of links. You make another to get that link's votes. And you make another to figure out data about the user, such as their name. Unless your API is crazy and they already bundle all this together, in which case your calls are probably not performing. Cool. So, this is the view. Again, it's showing the link, the votes, unknown user as the user of all, and how long ago. This is not set up to automatically update, but it does roughly show you how long ago this was submitted. Yeah, so that's all done in one query. And the same query pretty much is applied to search. So the only difference is that it applies that filter parameter instead of just being a pure query where it's not really asking data back in a specific format. All right, and then if you remember mutations or any data modification, this is one place where I deviated from the tutorial. I really wanted to try out Apollo's hooks that they offer because their API before hooks used render props in React, which is all right, I guess, but it looks really messy, and I hate my JSX being cluttered by logic, which is exactly what render props were doing. So I decided to just convert my mutations to hooks to A, save me some time, and B, if any of you do look at my repo later, you can also see the examples using render props. So with mutations, you can also set the cache update behavior for UI updates. So that's where you can say update the cache. Oh no, please work. Come on, come back, there we go. I did not want to have to yell. All right, so you can set your cache update behavior, and that's where your UI automatically updated after I submitted the link. Also know that optimistic UI updates and loading spinners, they weren't really part of the tutorial. Another thing I didn't really feel like customizing, so you might see updates when the UI is changed. So I will show you an example of a mutation at work. It looks like this. There's a delay, and now it's one vote. So that was just a query basically that was sent to Apollo, GraphQL, and you set the update logic to immediately display the number of votes. Back in the code, let's see. Oh, I'll show you the query actually from search. So this was not using hooks. It just had a function for what to do when you executed the search, and I also used GraphQL file types instead of GraphQL tag, because GraphQL tag also doesn't look pretty good. So yeah, you just specify the query that you want and any variables, and this should, no, it doesn't. Oh, I know why. Normally your queries run immediately on page load, so there's special things you have to do to allow it to query at will, in this case on click. This will probably show you what I mean. So this is the render props API. There is a component called query, another one called mutation, and another one I think called subscription. And render props just allow you to pass a function in here that describes some like custom stuff that's going to happen before you render. And it's kind of messy to me because when I return from my component, I really want it to be clean and not a lot of data manipulation. And here you don't have that. So in, let's see, the file that I'm going to show you for mutations. Ah, yes, this is a great one. This is the vote mutation. This is the hook version of that. So I don't wait until my return. I'm using mutation. So much like any other custom hook in React, it's prefaced by the word use, and you want to use mutation. You specify the mutation, what happens when it errors, what happens when the mutation comes back. In this case, we want to update the store after a vote occurs. And the error handling that I put in here, I did not push up, but I do have locally because I thought it might mess up. There is no error handling really as part of that tutorial, but you can kind of see my handiwork here. If I click on a vote again, that I already did, there's this little alert with what comes back to the API, which is that I already voted for it. Cool. questions about that so far? Cool. No, the mic is kind of going in and out. All right. All right, and then finally, there's subscriptions. This isn't really finally, there's a lot more to Apollo, but this is the last thing I'm really going to show you. Subscriptions provide UI feedback in this tutorial when another user submits or votes on a post. And it uses middleware called Apollo Link WS, WS standing for WebSocket. Again, not supported by Apollo Boost, which is Apollo's great React app. And I'll show you, let's see, I'll show you this. I'm going to have to do this through the GraphQL Playground to really show you how it works, because I want this to update when another user essentially submits the vote. So let me just, that's not what I wanted. Let me just submit another link so I can not have to worry about duplication here. Oh, that's redundant. All right. So remember this playground, which this is not. No, I'm gonna fix it. Look at that, I fixed it. All right, where's my mouse? Where's my cursor? Here it is. All right, so this is what a subscription query looks like. You just open it up with the word subscription, and then you can see in the docs what subscriptions you're allowed to create. So in this case, you can subscribe to new links, and you can subscribe your UI to new votes being submitted. As far as I know, it's not really something that you would test in this tool, because all it does is it opens a WebSocket connection. So it's just going to say listening, ... But if I submit a vote for the link that I just created, it should immediately update the UI. And I'm going to try to figure out how to split the screen. Hold on. I know there's apps that can do this for me, I just don't have them. Unless it's part of macOS now. All right. Oh boy. I'm gonna get a little bit. To vote using GraphQL Playground. Maybe. All right, so just to kind of explain what's going on here. Down here, these are the variables for your query. They're referenced with a $sign inside of your mutation or your query. You can also set your auth header here, which I've done, because voting is restricted to users who have logged in. So in this case, anything that is down here is what I want back from the API after I've submitted my vote. And this is just the parameter I'm sending to the API, which is the link ID. So you should see this update to 1 after I run this in GraphQL. There we go. So that was a subscription. It knew that there was an update. That's what WebSockets do. They maintain an active connection with the server so that you can have feedback like that, not just to you, but when you vote on something, other people will have that feedback too. Okay, and I do have some links for further learning. Once I clean up the speaker notes in this, you'll have access to this, because most of this I don't actually know. None of it did I link by URL. So the very first thing I would recommend, if you want to learn more, is going to How to GraphQL. As you can see, you'll build something that is pretty functional as part of the tutorial process, and you can play around with it. I could add actual error handling. I could add better UI updates. I could add fragments, which are something I haven't really used, so I didn't want to talk about them. Yeah, there's all sorts of things you can do. You can also implement, oh, hold on. There was that thing that I told you I'd show you and I didn't. Unless I'm crazy and not remembering correctly, which is also possible. Yeah, so the API doesn't actually give you a way to query the user, so I don't have a way to get that user's name, which is why it just says unknown user. That's why I say it's not my fault. So yeah, howtographql.com, they have the Node tutorial that actually creates the backend that I used. They have tutorials, I believe, for plenty of other things like Ruby and Python. So check that out. Lee Byron is one of the co-creators of GraphQL, and he has a talk and also has a blog post called Lessons from 4 Years of GraphQL, which you can learn from. There's this site for GraphQL rules, which is basically a bunch of people who have used GraphQL and been frustrated by those who haven't really been following consistent patterns, and it just recommends patterns to use. It's basically a style guide. How to wrap a REST API with GraphQL, and then the Apollo and GraphQL documentation. All right, that's my talk. Any questions? Right? Yeah.
Usually we have like Redux dev tools for state management.
Usually we have Redux dev tools for state management. What do you use when Apollo client is managing the state?
Yeah, so when Apollo client is managing the state, it does have its own dev tools, which I can show you actually. So someone who's probably used this for a little bit longer than I have could speak to this better. The Apollo DevTools do give you access to the Apollo cache, but I don't know a whole lot about using it. You can see all of the links that are currently in your cache as well as their current count. I'm not sure if there's time travel debugging here like there is in Redux, but if anyone has used this tooling, let me know. But yeah, this is on the Chrome store. This is what I mentioned. Has just 3 stars, but it works for my very, very limited local testing on this app. So it seemed okay. And for those of you who have used Apollo client, if any, do you have anything to add to that? Okay. Yeah, when I used Apollo client in production, I mostly, I didn't need a whole lot of time travel debugging because that's really UI focused. And when I'm dealing with API, there's not as much problems with that. And if I wanted to test a query, then I can do that in a GraphQL playground or GraphQL. I think someone over here had a question? Yeah.
Do you know if GraphQL has an interface to interact with like stored procedures in SQL Server or format responses by way of the user function in SQL Server or anything like that, or is it just purely querying tables?
So GraphQL doesn't query tables. GraphQL is completely unopinionated about how you do that. So if you want to use SQLize, you can use SQLize, whatever you're using on the database layer, GraphQL doesn't really care or know about. So you would connect to it just like you would another API. You wouldn't be directly interacting by running queries to the database that GraphQL actually sets up. Is that a good answer? Like I feel like those are jumbled words coming out of my mouth because I haven't done a lot of server-side GraphQL, but it doesn't really care about your database implementation. Do you have something to add? Or
when you set up a mutation, you essentially say run this code and you get this. So you just have to handle all the inputs you allow. The typing that you have.
yeah, so on the back end, there's something called resolvers, and the resolvers are how you decide how you're sending that data back. So that's where you would connect to the database, or you would connect to another API.
When you said you said something about REST, I didn't realize you could use REST with GraphQL. Have you looked into that at all? I mean, I can't look into it right now, but have you looked into it? You see how many ways to do it? Is it just returning, it's like it returns a JSON object with the resolvers, like all the REST info, return the JSON, and then is that it? Is it really that simple? I mean, I literally just
Yeah, so depending on the quality of the documentation an API has, it can be pretty simple. The only work that I've done with converting a REST API to GraphQL was pretty academic. I'm pretty sure I was following a tutorial from Fun Function. And it was like Goodreads, they have a terrible API, or they did when I followed this. And you kind of have to know what types to give the data. It's not going to automatically necessarily be able to know everything, but it's not too bad. There's a lot of tutorials online to show you how to do it. Obviously, it's not going to be as great as if your server was completely GraphQL, but it gives you that ability. Also allowing you to unify your API. If your API is GraphQL and all you want your client to know about is your GraphQL endpoint, then you can roll this into your existing API coming from a third-party REST endpoint. Yeah. You're welcome. Any other questions? No one? Did you guys learn something?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
No one else?
So-
Wait, question.
So what are some of the drawbacks of using GraphQL over REST APIs?
Yeah, so backend devs would say that they have to do a lot more work, which is kind of true. They have to really think about their API and do a little bit more tech design, from my understanding. Since I haven't been a server-side developer before, I can't really speak to all of the struggles that they might go to at that initial implementation phase. But yeah, they have to think about how their API can be translated to graphs and how they want to present that to the UI without coupling it to a view in the UI. That's probably the biggest drawback. Any blockers on me using GraphQL have always been like, the only backend language I would feel comfortable touching is Node, and for the last year I have not had a Node API to touch. So, yeah. There's probably other drawbacks, but I don't know. I'm a pretty big fan of GraphQL, so someone else might have to say them. Anyone used GraphQL and felt like it was a real drag? Okay. Yeah, I'd say server side.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome. Anyone else? Okay. I think that's it then.
Thank you, Jan.
All right, thank you.